Welcome to a video explanation on Chapter 7, Carthage. The chapter opens with Chris McCandless living in a small rural farming town of Carthage, South Dakota, during the spring of 1992. The story is first interrupted with flashbacks to the fall of 1990, illustrating his initial encounter with generous local businessman Wayne Westerberg, who offered him work and shelter. In the present timeline, McCandless is shown to have accepted the offer. His job consisted of manual labor, where he would clean and manage the machinery inside the Westerberg grain elevator. Moreover, he's seen to be socializing in the town's cabaret bar, where he plays the piano and interacts with the community. Finally, he resides in a communal Victorian house owned by Westerberg, where he lives with a family of fellow workers who have embraced him as one of their own. Quote 1. During those 4 weeks in Carthage, McCandless worked hard, doing dirty, tedious jobs that nobody else wanted to tackle. By Wayne Westerberg, page 62. This quote illustrates Wayne's admiration of Chris and how much Chris, or Alex, was valued by his new family in Carthage, as opposed to his biological family. Wayne is also saying that Chris was very reliable and like no other worker he had. Quote 2. Since they won't ever take me seriously, I'm going to completely knock them out of my life. I'm going to divorce them as my parents once and for all, and never speak to either of those idiots again as long as I live. By Chris McCandless, in a letter to his sister Corrine, page 64. Here we start to notice Chris being absolutist, having an unforgiving morality and a tendency toward drastic, irreversible decisions. It captures the furious resolution behind his journey. Cutting off his parents was not just an emotional reaction, but a calculated, permanent act of renunciation. This letter highlights his rejection of family as a core motivation for seeking a new identity and life entirely of his own making. Quote 3. Chastity is the flowering of man, and what are called genius, heroism, holiness, and the like are but various fruits which succeed it. By Henry David Thoreau, Walden, page 66. This passage was highlighted by Chris in his personal copy of Walden. The quote argues that purity is the highest moral and spiritual achievement, which is the philosophy that aligns perfectly with Chris's perfectionist point of view, making him take drastic decisions.
Some key vocabulary that can be found in Chapter 7 of Into the Wild can provide some insight into the life of Chris McCandless. Notable words that can be found in Chapter 7 are asceticism, astute, ambivalence, and polarization. Starting off with asceticism, it is defined by having strict self-control and giving up all forms of pleasures, usually for religious reasons. This can be connected to Chris's mindset, as it gives a better understanding into the reason Chris heads to Alaska and pursues a nomadic lifestyle. Next is ambivalence, which is described as having mixed feelings towards something or someone. Within Chapter 7, it was mentioned that there were conflicts with Chris McCandless' family as he was ranting towards his sister Corrine, his unstable relationship as another reason to his abandonment of his family. The next word is astute, which is being able to accurately analyze people and situations. Westerberg, who worked with Chris during his time in South Dakota, knew of his family's trouble, but didn't give much concern about it as he thought it was for good reason. Later on, after he finds out about Chris's death, where he has a different opinion and believes that Chris shouldn't be talking to his family like that by not speaking to them. Lastly, the final word, polarization, means division between two sharply contrasting groups of beliefs. Chris and his father had opposite beliefs, where the father wanted to exert authority while Chris wanted to live independently.
For the class passage, I selected an excerpt from page 64. Westerberg's latter conjecture, as it turned out, was a fairly astute analysis of the relationship between Chris and Walt McCandless. Both father and son were stubborn and high-strung. Given Walt's need to exert control and Chris's extravagantly independent nature, polarization was inevitable. Chris submitted to Walt's authority through high school and college to a surprising degree, but the boy raged inwardly all the while. he brooded at length over what he perceived to be his father's moral shortcomings, the hypocrisy of his parents' lifestyle, the tyranny of their conditional love. Eventually, Chris rebelled, and when he finally did, it was with characteristic moderation. Shortly before he disappeared, Chris complained to Corrine that their parents' behavior was so irrational, so oppressive, disrespectful, and insulting that I finally passed my breaking point. He went on, "Since they won't ever take me seriously, for a few months after graduation, I'm going to let them think they are right. I'm going to let them think that I'm coming around to see their side of things, and that our relationship is stabilizing. And then, once the time is right, with one abrupt, swift action, I'm going to completely knock them out of my life. I'm going to divorce them as my parents, once and for all, and never speak to either of those idiots again as long as I live. I'll be through with them once and for all, forever." Class discussion time. Here's a question. After hearing Chris's plan to completely cut his parents out of his life, how does it make you feel? Do you understand him, or does it seem like an overreaction? Feel free to talk to your partner or raise your hand.
In Chapter 7 of Into the Wild, we found three rhetorical languages, which are juxtaposition, pathos, and ethos. For juxtaposition, a quote can be found within Chapter 7, which says, "The chill Westerberg sensed between Alex and his parents stood in marked contrast to the warmth McCandless exhibited in Carthage." To explain this further, juxtaposition means placing two things close together to highlight their contrasting effects. Within this quote, the author Krakauer juxtaposes the emotional quality of the two relationships by saying the chill with his family and the warmth of his new family in Carthage. Ethos is another piece of rhetorical language that we found within Chapter 7, using the quote, "He was the hardest worker I've ever seen. He was what you call extremely ethical. He set pretty high standards for himself." Westerberg's testimonies of Chris shows ethos within the quote itself as you read it. The final piece of rhetorical language that we found within Chapter 7 is pathos, using the quote in the text which says, "Eventually, Chris rebelled. Shortly before he disappeared, Chris complained to Karine, which is his sister, that their parents' behavior was so irrational, oppressive, disrespectful, and insulting that I finally passed my breaking point." Chris's complaint about how his parents' behavior had a negative impact on him led Chris to abandon his family and adopt a new identity.
Now for the writing assignment. Chris McCandless wrote a letter to his sister, Corrine, explaining his furious decision to cut off his parents, but he never sent a letter to his parents themselves, choosing silence instead. Your task. Write the letter you think Chris could have or should have written to his parents from Carthage. In this letter, he would explain his feelings and his reasons for leaving. Use your understanding of his character from Chapter 7. Consider his tone and style. No more than a quarter page.